when Lincoln and his assassin were photographed together. By 1864, the long and bloody American Civil War was drawing to a close. Union forces scored victory after victory on several fronts, and the noose around the Confederacy was growing ever tighter, heralding an end to the hostilities. With momentum firmly in Union favor, Abraham Lincoln was decisively re-elected president that November. By the time of Lincoln's inauguration on March 4, 1865, it was clear that the war was almost over. In fact, Confederate General Robert E. Lee would formally surrender a month later at Appomattox Courthouse, with other Southern forces following suit shortly thereafter. Knowing the inevitability of Union victory, Lincoln called for a reconciliatory attitude towards his wayward countrymen. During his famous second inaugural address, Lincoln called for malice towards none and charity for all. He had hoped for a swift end to the conflict and an easy transition to peace, putting the war behind them. Those who had seceded from the Union would be allowed back into the country with a minimum of conditions, and no punitive measures would be taken against those who had rebelled. On that rainy March day, a large crowd had gathered to hear the president's speech. The country was exhausted after 4 years of the bloodiest conflict in American history, and the message of reconciliation and forgiveness resonated with the war-weary public. Famed photographer Alexander Gardner was on hand with his equipment and captured an image of the address. Located at the east portico of the Capitol building, Lincoln can be seen standing in the center of the frame, delivering his address. He is seen surrounded above and below by a large crowd interspersed with Union soldiers. The general mood of the event was hopeful and optimistic. With the war all but over, Lincoln and the rest of the country looked forward to rebuilding the torn nation and ushering in peace and prosperity for all Americans. There were some in the crowd, however, who did not share his optimistic and celebratory mood. Pictured on the balcony overlooking the president, famed actor John Wilkes Booth can be seen peering down on Lincoln. In the crowd below the podium from which Lincoln spoke stood a cluster of other men, associates of Booth, who were part of a larger conspiracy to decapitate the federal government and avenge the Southern cause. It is the only time a presidential assassin and his victim would be photographed together.
From assassinations to the bloodiest battles of history, discover the drama of real-life events with Magellan TV, the best-kept secret in the streaming world. We just learned the untold history of one of the Civil War's bloodiest fights, the Battle of Shiloh. You too can discover the truth as Magellan TV uncovers what it meant to be at the heart of the controversial conflict that ended with so many Union Army soldiers dead despite their victory. As the highest-rated documentary streaming app on Google Play, you can watch Magellan TV at home or on the go with no ads. Over 20 hours of true stories and uncovered mysteries are added weekly, making Magellan TV the best value for money of any documentary streaming service. And with 4K inclusive in your subscription, you can feel like you're practically on the battlefield yourself. Immerse yourself in the high-definition drama of history. Use the link in the description to claim our special offer, a 1-month free trial for Magellan TV.
John Wilkes Booth was arguably the most famous actor in America at the time, known for his charisma and dashing looks. Though a native of the Union state of Maryland, he was an avid proponent of slavery and despised abolitionists, and Lincoln in particular. Though he never fought for the Confederacy, he was a sympathizer of the Southern cause. With Confederate defeat all but inevitable, Booth and his co-conspirators hatched a plot to kidnap Lincoln in March, though nothing came of that plan. With the surrender of Lee's forces on April 9, 1965, Booth and his companions switched their intentions from kidnapping to assassination as revenge for the Southern cause. In addition to Booth targeting Lincoln, Vice President Andrew Johnson would be assassinated by German immigrant George Atzerodt, and Secretary of State William Seward would be targeted by Lewis Payne. Other members of the conspiracy included David Herold, Samuel Arnold, Michael O'Laughlin, Edward Spangler, John Surratt, and Mary Surratt, all of whom would provide material support and assistance for the killers. The plan involved a simultaneous attack on all their targets, striking on April 14th at 10 p.m. On the night of the attempt, George Atzerodt had cold feet and never attempted to assassinate Andrew Johnson, who was home at the time. Lewis Payne, aided by David Herold, broke into the home of William Seward, slashing at his neck and face with a Bowie knife. 9 days earlier, Seward was severely injured in a carriage accident and was bedridden, unable to defend himself. This, however, turned to his advantage, as the metal brace around his neck turned aside the repeated stabs of Payne. Though badly cut around his face, Seward would survive the attack and would continue in his role as Secretary of State. That evening, Abraham Lincoln was in a celebratory mood. and decided to spend the evening at Washington, D.C.'s Ford Theater, enjoying a comedy, Our American Cousin, starring British actress Laura Keane. Accompanying Lincoln in the presidential box was his wife, Mary Todd, as well as friend Major Henry Rathbone and his fiancée, Clara Harris. Security was lax that evening, as the denizens of the Capitol were celebrating the end of hostilities. Booth managed to climb the stairs and found the door to the presidential box unguarded. There, Booth waited until around 10:15 p.m. At that time, a line in the play brought the biggest laugh from the crowd that evening, drowning out the sounds of what was about to happen. At the height of the laughter, Booth strode into the box and shot Lincoln in the back of the head with a .44 single-shot pistol. Rathbone tried to seize Booth, but the actor slashed him in the arm with a knife before leaping 10 feet to the stage below. The impact broke his leg, but Booth, ever the showman, shouted "Sig Temper Tyrannis," or "Thus always to tyrants," Virginia's state motto, before hobbling off stage. He left the theater and was helped onto a waiting horse by stagehand Edward Spangler before fleeing into the night. The bullet that struck Lincoln had penetrated his skull and had lodged itself behind the right eye, a fatal wound. Charles Leo, a 23-year-old Army surgeon in the audience, examined the wound and stated that any attempt to move Lincoln to the White House would kill him before reaching their destination. Instead, the president was carried by 4 Union soldiers to a nearby boarding house. Lincoln would never regain consciousness, but would cling to life through the night. There was little that could be done, however, and at 7:22 a.m., Lincoln would succumb to his wound. A manhunt for Booth and the other conspirators was initiated. Booth would meet up with David Herold before fleeing south into Virginia. There, his leg would be treated by Dr. Samuel Mudd, who would later be implicated in the conspiracy, though there was still controversy about his involvement. Fueled by a $100,000 reward, the conspirators were hounded relentlessly, and Booth and Herold spent several days in the northern Virginia woods before taking refuge at a farm located near Port Royal, Virginia. On April 26th, they were tracked down and surrounded by a federal cavalry detachment, who demanded they surrender. Herold gave himself up, but Booth refused to surrender. The barn was set on fire, and escaping the flames, Booth was shot by Corporal Boston Corbett, though there were some reports that he shot himself. He died a short time later and was buried in secret. The other members of the conspiracy were taken into custody and placed on trial. All 8 of the defendants were found guilty. George Azeroth, David Herold, Lewis Payne, and Mary Surratt, who ran a boarding house where the conspirators met and provided weapons and other material support for the plan, were all sentenced to hang, a sentence that was carried out on July 7, 1865. Dr. Mudd, Michael O'Loughlin, and Samuel Arnold would receive life sentences in prison for their roles, and stagehand Edward Spangler would receive 6 years. John Surratt managed to flee the country, but would be recaptured in 1867. He stood trial, but the case was dismissed. O'Loughlin would die of yellow fever in prison, but the others would be pardoned in 1869 by Andrew Johnson. It was believed by many, including Secretary of War Edwin Stanton, that the plot was organized by Confederate leadership. A thorough investigation was conducted, with particular attention paid to Jefferson Davis, the Confederate president, though no connection could be made. Booth and the others acted independently, with no formal orders or support from Davis or any other Confederate leader. After his death, Lincoln's body would be laid in state at the Capitol, where it would then be taken by special train to his home in Springfield, Illinois, touring several major cities along the way, including New York and Chicago. Though he had urged a conciliatory attitude, Lincoln's assassination evaporated any goodwill the Union had towards the defeated Confederacy. Led by the more radical members of the Republican Party, more punitive measures would be enacted, ones that would have lasting consequences in the decades to come.